Recording, compositions, and European auditions with Judith Farmer. Stay inspired. I wanted to dive in, Judy and Gernot, to hear a bit about your Grammy Award nomination. Could you share with us a little bit about how this came about and what the experience was like?
Well, why don't you go?
Okay. So, well, that was certainly a very happy day in our professional and our personal lives to receive that nomination, especially since it's an award that comes from our peers, you know, from people who know exactly what it means to be a musician and how much blood, sweat, and tears you have to pour into your work, you know, to get a good result. So that was wonderful. It was for the album Passing Through, a chamber music album of my music, and Judy played on the majority of the pieces. And the whole day, the whole Grammy day was really fun. It was a long day. It was about 12 hours. And for most of the day, we didn't eat anything except for a hamburger. We were in Staples Center in Los Angeles. But it was wonderful. I mean, we got to connect with, you know, some friends we hadn't seen in a while and met some new people. And it was just an all-around positive atmosphere because as, you know, as different as people were, they all had the same goal. They want to make good records. So, and that creates a bond. And it was really a very wonderful atmosphere.
Sounds amazing.
One of the reasons I before we started recording, I mentioned there was actually a funny aspect to this. So Gernot really does all the lion's share. You know, he composes the work, he arranges the recording sessions, he really does all of the hard work. And he did the submission for the Grammy, and we had actually planned a trip to the Galapagos. And of course, I was not thinking a little bit about the whole Grammy process, and it was very early in the morning. He comes in and says, "We got nominated." Of course, this had not been on my mind at all. I'd been thinking about make sure I pack everything.
It was the same day we left.
Yes, there was.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a fun day.
Yeah, very much so.
So that's so exciting. You got to celebrate in the Galapagos Islands. I wanted to ask more about your recording process and kind of the behind the scenes of making a CD or video and being able to work one-on-one together, you know, as a bassoonist, Judy, and a composer, Gernot. We have your lovely cat visiting us.
I'll exit the cat.
Yeah. Oh, okay. She or he's like, I'm hungry, or
That's what she's saying.
Yes. Yeah, it'd be great to kind of hear about just y'all's great team together, and just could you share maybe how you kind of coordinate that, or maybe coming up with different projects? How do you work on that together?
Well, it was in all cases that at some point I felt like I had enough music together that I really wanted to record. And then, you know, to see who's available and when we can do it. And we both actually work on the logistics. Judy works on getting the recording venue. I work on asking the musicians and getting the union contracts and all that. And we like recording in concert halls as opposed to a recording studio because we like to capture the sound of the room and the natural reverb. That's one thing. And then I also like to sort of, to me, a live performance and a recorded performance are really two different animals. I'm not trying, we're not trying to recreate a live performance. I mean, the attractive thing about a live performance is that you can feel the energy of the audience in and as a musician, you react to that, and then the audience reacts again. So there's an interplay going on that you can't recreate if you're just in an empty hall. So yeah, there's editing involved, but it's really to me the most important thing is to keep the emotional stream of the music going. So whatever you edited, make sure that whatever the emotion is of generated by the musicians is present throughout the final take. So, for instance, if you had a perfect take with absolutely no little flaws, but feels a little cold, or it feels a little remote, it's not a good idea to use that, because that interrupts that emotional stream, and the emotional stream is really what an audience reacts to. That goes either to a concert or listens to a record. So that's sort of the guiding principle behind it. And then, of course, after it's done, you want to make sure that people know about it. And we've been doing extensive PR after each project. And then, the record is out there, and we're always hopeful that some people will react positively to it, and that there's interest in both in Judy's playing, in teaching, and also in my compositions.
Wonderful. And Judy, could you share a little bit about like the preparations and just how that's paralleled with your orchestra and opera work? And, is it, and then also, just being able to work, one-on-one, being like, is this, the idea that you have, with this piece? Because with playing new works, it's always kind of a fun process to bounce ideas off of the interpretation.
In most of the cases, we try to do a trial run or two before the actual recording session. We have, a couple venues here where we can have house concerts, and just that, I don't need to tell anyone here that each performance gives you another perspective, and so we normally try to do that, and sometimes we don't have so much control. It's, when you're getting, we're fortunate that we can use one of the very nice recital halls at USC for our recording projects, and we just have to take it when it's available. So we have had occasions where I've had to record in the morning and then go play an opera rehearsal, or vice versa. So it just can't pick and choose as far as the booking of the hall is concerned. So we just kind of fit it in where it fits. And I want to make sure we give a shout out. We have a truly special and wonderful recording engineer, Richard Green, who just makes everybody sound good.
Yeah, it's wonderful hearing just how many people do come together, but also all that, the marketing and the website design and kind of the creative project inspiration is also from both of you. So love hearing you're wearing lots of hats. I loved watching your YouTube video and composition and performance of Equal Time.
Well, Gernot was inspired to write this piece during the pandemic, and I'll let him talk about that part. But so I just practiced the individual parts, and I will say probably one of the more challenging things was recording the slow movement, because if you're playing a duet with a live person, you're both always, using your ears and finding each other for fine-tuning in the intonation. And if I'm playing to a pre-recorded track, I don't have that luxury. So I would practice it a lot with the tuner for sure. And once we had one track down, then I could practice to that one before we recorded the second track. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that, okay. Yeah, so that, of course, the technical challenges and being together is something else. But I have to say I worked probably the hardest on the slow movement, just to try, and also working on balances that a lot of inferred harmonies that you can try to bring them out with the balance. And so yeah, it was one of several pandemic projects we had, that just trying to find good things to do with our time. And I'll let Gernot continue. Just kudos to him for having this idea, and it seems to have struck a chord with a lot of people.
Yeah, it was like Judy said, it was definitely work immediately slowed down after, once the lockdown started. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do with myself? And I have a list of instrumentations, chamber music instrumentations, of pieces that I want to write. And the two bassoons was pretty much at the top of it at that point. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to write the piece, and then we're going to make a video out of it, because at that point, a lot of people were doing that already. They were doing similar things. And so I got a tip from my friend Todd Mason, who actually did the video post-production. He's a professional, he was a professional videographer, and is also an excellent composer. So he gave me the tip to get an app for the iPhone called Filmic Pro, which is not very expensive. I mean, maybe $20 or so. And it made a huge difference, really, both in sound and in picture quality. And we recorded Judy, left the camera at the same spot, and then sent the videos to my friend Todd, who put it together.
Funny side note, we had several people comment about who's the other bassoonist.
Oh,
Right.
It's Judy, yeah.
I thought that was fun. I said, really? You can't tell that's the same person, but...
I wanted to ask, just with Gernot, that could you share just about a glimpse into where you grew up and how you got introduced to music and composition? It would be great to hear.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Austria, in the mountains, in a town called Innsbruck, and I wasn't really interested much in music until my mid-teens. I was more into outdoor activities, all kinds of sports, winter, summer, skiing, skating, playing tennis, hiking in the mountains, playing soccer, etc. And I think when I was 15 or 16, I heard Oscar Peterson on the radio, and something really clicked. Some light bulb went off, and all of a sudden I thought, that's the greatest thing, and I want to be part of that. And I owned a guitar, but I never practiced, and it took me a couple of years to get serious about the subject, because I didn't think at that point that a career in music would be in the cards, because I was already so late. So when I was 19, I started taking lessons with a local jazz guitarist. And the interest grew and grew and grew. And in the meantime, I was studying computer programming. But after 3 years, I thought, okay, I'm going to give music a shot, and I'm going to go study in Graz, Austria, at the jazz department.
Which was the biggest or only jazz department in Europe at the time.
Yeah, it was certainly the biggest jazz department in Europe at the time. Yeah. So that's how I got into the music track, and after a couple of years, I realized that I really like composing and arranging, so I changed my major to that. Graduated, got a Fulbright scholarship to Berklee College of Music, did 2 years of film scoring there, came back to Austria, taught for a couple of years, and then we moved to LA because I wanted to be involved in the film music business. And the concert music thing for me developed as a hobby. I was, from a certain point on, I was writing mainly music for Judy, with something with bassoon, and that became more and more serious. And at some point, around 2000 or so, I thought, okay, I'm going to make this part of my career. And so ever since, I have this parallel career in concert music and in film music as an orchestrator for a number of Hollywood composers.
I wanted to ask both Judy and Gernot too about working in Europe, and we were talking a bit about orchestral auditions, Judy, in your interview, maybe discussing your Geneva competition and what that was like. But are there any things that come to mind now, after living and working in Europe and living and working in America?
My first audition in Braunschweig was, like you described, no screen, pretty informal in a rehearsal hall. And a lot of conversation between the participants and the jurors. But that's the only one I remember like that. Radio was definitely with a screen until the finals, I'm pretty sure, and any audition I did after that. Though, interestingly, I did audition a long time ago for the Philadelphia Orchestra here, and there was no screen even in the first round. And I had come from Europe to take the audition, and I was standing. And Mr. Garfield said, "Could you sit?" And the audition was like on the third floor of the building, and my seat strap was in the basement where the warm-up room was. And I said, "Well, I can go get my seat strap." No one had suggested to me that it mattered. And I think it was my first American audition. And so it's just these little things that you don't even think that it matters, but it does make an impression. And if you're doing something very different from everybody else, that can be good or not so good, I think. Yeah, I think we talked about in the interview, if I had to just make one generalization about the difference between the American and the European auditions is, I find in Europe, if you have something to say musically, they might be a little more forgiving of a flub, any little error. And here, I think just because so much of it is a numbers game, you can be playing well and have a little mess up, and they have to find some way to cut the numbers down. So it gets you eliminated pretty quickly.
Your Geneva competition, could you share a bit more about that experience?
The Geneva competition is one of our larger competitions. It maybe the biggest one for us, I think, is the ARD competition in Munich. But this is up there, and the year I did the Geneva competition, I think there were maybe 40 bassoonists there, and 4 of them were French bassoonists, and the rest all German or American. And all of the French bassoonists advanced, and I think 4 American or 4 German bassoon playing people advanced. And it was Roger Bernstein was on the jury, and some other name I should remember. And Maurice Allard was the chairman of the jury, so that might help explain why all the French bassoonists advanced, but also they all advanced too because I was told they go home from that competition and start preparing for the next one. For them, it is a big part of their training. And I think that's less true for us than in the States for sure. And Richard and I both went to school in Austria. And Richard, you studied there, right? Yeah.
Will Roberts and I were there together.
In Salzburg, right?
Salzburg. I remember we talked about playing in the Camerata.
Right.
While we were there, yeah. So this is very interesting. Back in the 60s, early 70s, I have never taken an audition where I was behind a screen. As often as not, they were in a small room or a hotel room. Most of them by invitation. So it really changed a lot after that.
I'm not sure it's changed only for the better, I have to say, but that would be another topic. So just back to Geneva quickly. I enjoyed your
comment particularly about playing musically, because that was the greatest part of my experience there, playing in a group there where they played with gusto. They wanted to make something musical happen. And I recall taking a recording of the Cleveland Symphony there and playing it for some of them. And they looked at me and said, "What a perfect orchestra, but no heart." And the difference in music making was, I found, profound, and I think it's still very much that way. Trying to compete against the Europeans, it's difficult to be really expressive from the Americans.
I think it's just a different emphasis in training. But I was going to say, if I'm trying to encourage a student to do any competition, the IDRS or Make Quigley, whatever, I always say winning is nice, winning is good, but the true value is in the preparation. You gain so much just from really intently studying a fixed program, and I have to say the payoff. I was happy and fortunate to advance to the semifinals, and that meant that you got to play a little recital in the concert hall there, and I just remember enjoying that very much. It's nice acoustic, and there was a very appreciative audience, and it was a great experience. So I encourage people, even if they think, oh, I can't win, it would be nice to win, but it's not the entire point.
Joey's asked, fascinating insights about auditioning. When auditioning for EU orchestras, are there scoring matrices utilized in those rounds?
Yeah, Judy mentioned by the numbers, right? When you were differentiating between an emphasis of a committee, of a group of adjudicators. And I was curious if you were kind of like indicating there are practices extant where everybody's doing charting for at least a round or two before, finals. Something along those lines was I was curious.
To my knowledge, there's nothing standardized, that everybody's doing the same. When I said numbers, I mean just the sheer number of people who apply, that even for a modest-sized position in the States, 100 people will show up. So that's what I meant about the numbers. They had to find some way to cut down the number of players. Where are you located, Joey?
Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh,
yes. Yeah, I'm not too far from you. Good seafood there. Goodness. We live in the desert. We miss it all the time. And produce. But thank you. I'm sorry. That makes perfect sense. I have a handful of, colleagues that I see chasing those opportunities like you described. Like it might not have been or it isn't as robust as maybe it was at some point as far as like a career base goes. But there's a lot more innovation around incomes these days. So it's still worth chasing nonetheless, especially if people have these career goals associated with winning one of those positions. So.
Well, it was one of the things that made me so very sad about, one of the many things that made me very sad about the pandemic was, getting the union paper here, the musicians union paper, and just in very small print, 3 or 4 pages at the back of a number of issues of auditions that have been canceled. Because of course, I'm just wishing for the up and coming people that they have opportunities to compete and maybe get a job. That would be the goal for a lot of them, and that's been one of the many heartbreaking things about the pandemic.
Gernot, I wanted to ask you, any advice for composers just starting out their careers? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, I think one advice that I could give is, make as many connections to your colleagues as possible, because you never know where your future work might come from. And it is really often the case that you end up working for or with people who you went to school with or to a summer festival. And of course, when you're young, you don't have that experience yet. But and people, I remember when I was in school, people kept coming in saying the same thing, but we couldn't really do anything with it because we're not in a position to receive serious work on a regular basis. So, but it proved to be very true what these artists were saying, and so that's probably really important advice. And otherwise, in terms of the music, I think you just first of all you should wear many hats. Be proficient in technology, because hardly anything now works without technology. I started out with pencil and paper, and that's long gone. And it's really, I have to say, much more convenient the way it is with the computer. But otherwise, follow your heart, and I think that's what all the young up and coming composers are doing anyway. They have their favorite kind of music that speaks to them most, and they're going down that route. Like I went down the route of jazz for a long time because it was really fascinating for me, and then other things entered my musical life and that were just as fascinating. So I would say follow your instincts, make lots of friends in the community, and just really work hard on your technique, so you can present and realize the music that you want to write in the best possible way.
I wanted to ask both of you in regards with your students and thinking about studies, is there a course that you wish could be offered to students?
Well, during the pandemic at USC, while everything was on Zoom, we did have, I think it was 3 times a week, they had an recording engineering class with recommendations, because of course every student has a very different starting point. Some people already have some quite sophisticated equipment, and others have nothing. And so they really had to go to some trouble to say, A and B go together and don't use C. And so I think that was a helpful and a useful tool. When you mentioned that you would ask this question, I did want to slightly different mention a class that USC has about how to survive as a freelance musician. So it tells you how to write your resume. It tells you how to avoid injury. I mean, that's a thing that I think just does not get discussed often enough, about how not to hurt yourself, and just minding your P's and Q's, have good manners, show up on time. So I think that's a very valuable class, and the students love it because they feel like this is something that helps them as they're going out the door, the valuable information that they need. Did you have a thought?
Yeah, I would also say, take a music business class. And I'm sure most universities offer that now. When I was in Graz, it wasn't offered. At Berkeley it was, and I didn't go, which I kind of regretted after the fact. But I would say it'd be a good thing for everyone to know what how the business aspect of the music business works.
I had to add that Kim Walker's one of my colleagues on our faculty now, and she teaches a special course in entrepreneurship. But I've got to smile because Judy and I share a very successful student in Jeremy Fain.
Indeed.
Jeremy is one of the top real estate agents in Houston right now.
But I think he's still playing, right, Richard?
To the best of my knowledge, whenever he can, yes.
I saw something, he posted something about getting his instrument overhauled and getting back on the horse.
He and Laura, what's her name? They were swapping instruments for comparing the last I heard. So I don't know what they're playing right now, but he still plays.
We have a question from Joey, and this is for Gernot, and it's about your composition work. So, Gernot, does your list of ensembles for which to compose include the Reed Quintet with oboe, clarinet, sax, bass clarinet, and bassoon?
It is on my list yet. Yes, I haven't gotten around to it yet, but it is a very attractive ensemble, and it's relatively new, maybe like 10, 15 years since in the Netherlands, I believe, they got things started in a serious way, and it's very popular now in this country and elsewhere too. So yeah, I haven't had a chance to do it yet, and I actually, during the pandemic, I finally and things tend to stay on my list for a long, long time. I heard a duo for violin and cello about 15 years ago in a concert here in LA by Erwin Schulhoff. And immediately the instrumentation went on the list, and only like 3 or 4 months ago, I finally wrote a piece for it.
I see. I love Schulhoff.
Are you in a reed quintet, Joey?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's called Paradise
Winds, I suppose.
And I'm, unashamedly.
That's right.
I'm using my corporate Zoom too, so it would be less interesting if I had all those indicators up in the background view. But anyway, I'm glad to hear that, and also bless your heart for staying committed to your list for so long. I would struggle. Either I would lose the format of this list, or my energy would shift into some other focal point, and I would kind of lose track of a former goal. But it's kind of like a journal, I guess, where you can look back and go, oh, I have this new idea, or I didn't realize some facet of the instrument for which I wanted to write, and now this idea is much more readily accessible, and I can get this thing accomplished due to the sounds or something that I've learned. Anyway, I'm glad you're aware of the reed quintet, Gernot. That's really cool. It means a lot to us. We love partnering with living, breathing composers, and especially composers who have a diverse aesthetic. And hopefully that's not lumping you into a single statement in terms of your artistic output, but it's crystal clear based on your commitment to the blues and your commitment to rhythm, vis-a-vis groove. That is a high priority when we're on stage and when we try to be stimulated by our own, hard work. Sometimes there's pieces that you work up that are very muscular and require tons of calorie burn, and then there's and then you get through them and you have an impression of yeah, we did it. There's it's like climbing a tall mountain. But then there's the pieces that require some energy, but you can do that exercise much more often, and they're more rewarding to play. That to me feels much more fun when going on stage. And as far as the audience, those are usually the ones the audience usually likes. Tasting your repertoire in those ways in smaller bites instead of big, exhausting, minimalist triumphs, for example. So yeah, you can see a little bit of what we think about when we try to pick music and partner with the community of living composers around us. So this is a really beautiful opportunity, especially since you were singing the praises of networking. And so Julie, thank you. I'm going to be chasing Gernot's audio for a while.
I assume I can listen to recordings of your group on the Paradise Winds website.
Yes, sir. We have a very busy team, and there is certainly, though, a YouTube channel dedicated. Some of it's live, some of it's produced. So, anyways, if you care for anything that we didn't have readily obvious when you engage with our content, I will help you out with that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I will definitely listen. Absolutely.
Cool. I'm so glad you know about the reed quintet. It is wonderful sound. Have you been exposed much to it, Judy? Do you have students taking it on in the school?
I have several, one colleague and one former student here who I think are in groups of that description. I have heard one online once, I'll be honest. So I have not gotten into it very deeply myself, but I think, welcome. I obviously I like playing an unusual instrumentations. The latest one of Gernot's was bassoon, cello, and piano, which we recorded in June. Mm-hmm. And that's out there now, and
as a video.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
We also recorded a piece for bassoon and bass clarinet and melodica.
I had to double on melodica, so.
I love that instrument. I use it for a teaching tool on somewhat regular basis. That's really cool.
How do you utilize it?
So imagine a setting where a group of students is totally unfamiliar with piano entirely. And so the visual of the key layout and how small it is, that I can carry it around a room and just walk them through a little bit. And I tell them right away that the real piano has strings and hammers. This thing I can activate with air. There's these differences. But they can touch it too. When you blow through it, they can reach up and, you know, noodle some instruments. And you carry that in a bag on your hip versus a big piano. It's much more difficult to mobilize. Obviously, there's all those cool keyboards, you know, and stuff like that. But this was my low budget solution. I do the same thing with ukulele, and that's in like a rock music course setting where students aren't sure what a chord is, like, at all. Like, you know, you have to define that for a group of learners that have never played instruments or sung. That was a big that was a big career challenge that I had to overcome. So I chose these instruments, and, you know, they act engaged when they get a chance to touch them. That's why I'm pretty well committed. Plus, there's all these oddball live jazz albums where somebody pulls one out and plays solo on it. That sounds so cool because of the change of color of a solo. You know, I have like accordion playing friends who love to riff. There might be one or two. Gosh, you guys are probably connected to them. I'm trying to think of one of them's name. Frank
Moreau.
Yeah. And wasn't he that tragically passed away? You know, yeah. Thank you. And there was another protege that he left behind, and that guy taught somebody in my generation who's in his 30s trying to, you know, develop the instrument and make it more than just, you know, beer hall songs, which is also tons of fun. but that's some of the aesthetic where I've been exposed to melodica like that, Judy. So I'm glad. Did you have to do like chordal work to it, or were you just picking a melody out and articulating it?
Just dyads mainly.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, good on you for being so inventive with introducing young people to music. I think my father was from Southern California. When he was a young man, the music in the schools was stellar. And where I grew up, we also had wonderful music education in the schools. And from what I can gather, except maybe in Texas, that is not the case anymore. That I don't need to tell anybody, it's one of the first things to get cut in public schools.
Situations with college students at community college who take kind of an MHL survey, and that's when you're walking them through those things so that they have a music. That's my, you know, philosophy. I haven't had it with younger kids before. So Arizona is very dynamic. There's these weird programs. They're, you know, charter schools run amok. So it's very inconsistent, the types of programs and so forth. But yeah, we all deal with that, don't we? The first thing is to get cut.
About some books that come to mind, Judy and Gernot, are there any, it doesn't have to be music related, but yeah, are there any, a book that you could recommend that you found influential for us to check out?
The two books I had in mind are probably not going to be anything people aren't already familiar with, but I think on my syllabus, I have The Art of Wind Playing by Arthur Weisberg. I think is a really good book to be familiar with, and probably everybody knows also Arnold Jacobs' Song and Wind is another really good go-to just for us wind players. And another one that I found very helpful is The Inner Game of Tennis. And there is an inner game of music, but I actually find The Inner Game of Tennis better. And those are just books I recommend to young people, and I would be well served to reread them myself. But
I would say, from my point of view, a book I really like is the orchestration book by Samuel Adler, in conjunction with the recordings. So when I bought it, it was all a set of CDs. Maybe now it comes on a flash drive, or it's accessible through a website. I'm not sure, but that is really, if you have the recordings and are able to look at the score excerpts, that's sort of really the second best thing that you can do, short of being in a room with an orchestra and listening with the score. Another book that I really enjoyed is by a composer named Henry Brandt, who I believe he won a Pulitzer Prize or a Grammy. I'm not exactly sure, but he won a major prize, and he was also an orchestrator actually in Hollywood. And he wrote a book called Sounds and Textures, and it deals with balances of instruments individual instruments and instruments groups within an orchestra or within a chamber ensemble. And that's a highly interesting book. There are no sound examples, but it's written in a way that you can really easily, grasp and imagine what he has in mind.
Judy, could you share with us about your instrument and any fun quirks about it or that comes to mind?
Well, Richard already knows about my predilection for 10,000 series heckles. They're just my favorite. And I switched to the current one, I think it was 2008. That's about right.
Even earlier.
I bought it from a studio musician here when he retired, and it was just a little more baritone-y than the one I had been playing before. It was a little more tenory, and we're always trying to strike that balance in our playing, that we want to get enough highs so we carry, but enough lows so we sound good. And so for the especially for film scoring here, the darker instruments seem to do a little better with the close miking. So that was a big part of why I just tried to go for the slightly darker instrument.
I was going to say, I really enjoyed the opportunity to play with Judy on our 10,000 series together.
Richard very kindly invited me and Gernot to his university in Lubbock to give some classes, and Richard and I performed the Toller duo concertant, or whatever the title of that piece is, together. And how many bassoons do you have, Richard? One of each series?
Not quite. The latest one I had was a 12, and I just sold that to a student, one of my students who's now at New England. But they start at 3, and it goes up to the latest one as a late 10.
And, so Richard, if he has a guest who plays a 10, he can play a matching instrument. So, which is a very nice service.
Judy had an 11 for a while, which had belonged to Illinois Chiquet. And if that says anything, quite a famous jazz musician. And I thought it had the most gorgeous tenor range, but Judy didn't feel that it was the right instrument for her.
I have an 11 that Manig had me put in an oil bath for about a week. And it was extraordinarily dark and didn't have any variety, so it wound up in another orchestra.
Yeah. I think it's very personal. I own an 11, and I went to school on an 11, and I won both my major auditions on the 11. And I got the job in Vienna, and as you all probably know, the 11,000 series, they are for 440. That's where they want to be. And the orchestra tuned to 445. So I had a problem playing first bassoon on that bassoon. And the second bassoonist, who was about to retire, had the first 10 I tried. And so I just, tried it in a break one day, and I went, oh, this would make my life so much easier. So when he retired, he kindly sold it to me. And played on that one for many years.
That's interesting to hear. My 11 also was extraordinarily flat. Hans Manig did a lot of work on it to bring it up to 440.
That instrument, so I ended up lending that instrument to a colleague here in Los Angeles who's a really big guy, puts a lot of air through the instrument. And just now, I want to say, it's starting to open up. So I think that just those sticker-walled instruments just need a longer time to come alive. And I think they might be coming into their own now.
Judy, was your solution to playing at 445 shorter vocal and shorter reeds? What did you do?
I had little tiny reeds, and I bought a zero vocal. I didn't end up playing it, but my reeds were probably several millimeters shorter than they are now, and narrow, and it was a challenge, I will confess. But it was easier with the 10. I think the 10 is probably tuned more to 442, so it wasn't such a stretch.
So grateful to have you here, Judy and Gernot. Thank you so much.